Wow, damn. 300,000 subscribers. In 2 years, Mother's Basement has gone from a simple hobby project that I started to keep me busy while I search for real work to a full-blown job in its own right that leaves me feeling more enriched, both financially and personally, than I'd ever be working for somebody else, as well as a pillar of the anime YouTube community, or something like that. And for all of the pomp and circumstance with which I present my videos, I honestly never saw this coming. Starting out, I never thought that I'd be able to make my money back, let alone make a living out of this. So to be sitting at 300,000 subscribers, almost a third of the way to that million sub mark that we all aim for, it really feels like a dream come true. When I reach these big milestones, I like to look back. At 100K, I talked about my top 10 anime openings of all time. At 200K, I talked about my top 10 anime openings of all time because it took me almost 100,000 subscribers to actually get my 100K special made. And now, at 300,000 subscribers, in honor of the classic anime tradition of the 3x3, I give you 9 of the most important anime I've ever watched. My 3x300K special. I'm not gonna call this my top 9 favorite anime or the top 9 best anime I've ever seen because I don't think there's any way I could reasonably encapsulate either of those topics into just 9 or 10 shows without spending like a year writing the script. Instead, these are 9 anime series that helped to shape my understanding of what anime can be and in one way or another helped make me who I am today. Everyone has a first anime. Not necessarily the first anime that they ever actually watched, but the first show that made them think, wow, I want to see more Chinese cartoons specifically like this one. Like most people my age, I grew up on Dragon Ball Z, Digimon, Pokemon, and Beyblade. But I wasn't really aware of them as something separate from the Western cartoons that I was watching until I was much older. Growing up in Canada, my options for watching anime on TV were pretty limited. The closest thing we had to Adult Swim and Toonami in the Great White North was the Bionics late night block on YTV, and the selection there wasn't great. I mean, we did have Ghost in the Shell and Witch Hunter Robin, but I was too young and stupid to appreciate those shows at the time, so instead, the anime that made me actively start seeking out other anime to watch was Inuyasha. Inuyasha has its problems, its huge, glaring problems, but until you become aware that there's no end in sight for the story, it's a really fun watch. Rumiko Takahashi's signature blend of action, drama, and comedy is addictive, and her wonderful dialogue keeps the will they, won't they relationship of Kagome and Inuyasha alive long past its expiration date. As a kid, the maturity on display in Inuyasha's storytelling was like nothing I'd ever seen before, but it was still simple and action-packed enough to hold my young attention. Sunrise's slick animation was also several steps above the largely Toei-produced shows that I'd grown up on. Cardcaptor Sakura and Metabots were the only shows that really came close to it. And dang it, to a young man with no real concept of how good waifus could be, Kagome and Sango were top waifus. I got totally sucked in by the show's world and characters. I fantasized about going on adventures like I saw in the show and having cool demonic powers. Inuyasha was the first character I ever cosplayed. My parents put a lot of effort into making my costume for Halloween in 6th grade. Inuyasha got me to buy figurines. More importantly, it got me to seek out other anime by the truckload. Thoroughly enamored with Inuyasha, I picked up Naruto, Bleach, Death Note, Eureka 7, and Full Metal Alchemist. I started buying anime on DVD so that I wouldn't miss episodes. I started reading Anime Insider and going to Anime Club at the public library to learn about new shows to watch. Inuyasha was just the taste that I needed to get hooked. And toward the end of its run, several years after it started airing, it taught me a valuable lesson about disappointment with its bullshit, insubstantial cliffhanger ending. To this day, I strongly prefer stories that manage to reach a definitive ending, but definitely not as much as some other AniTubers. I don't think the ending is paramount because despite the disappointment, I still love a lot of things about Inuyasha. And I love the similarly endless and uneven Ranma 1/2, and the endless but otherwise almost perfect Detective Conan. A show with a weak or non-existent ending that makes me love its characters is always going to be better to me than something that has a strong ending but doesn't grab me on the way to it. My emotional investment in a series is always going to be driven by consistently good direction, acting, and writing. The small things, not the big moments. I'm nowhere near as fond of Inuyasha now as I was back then, but it got me started on the road that led me here, and it's stuck with me for that whole journey. There's a little bit of shame in carrying a torch for Inuyasha after all these years, but there's a lot in my unabashed love for this next series. My number one guilty pleasure, my first harem anime, and the first show that I ever bought on DVD, Girls Bravo. Girls Bravo, if you're not familiar, is a harem anime about a puny little high school boy named Yukinari Sasaki who is so afraid of girls that he breaks out in hives whenever they touch him. One day, after he walks in on his ultra tsundere childhood friend Kyrie in the shower and subsequently takes a shining wizard to the face, he falls through a magic portal in his bathtub to Seirin, a planet behind the moon that's 90% populated by women. And of course, all of those women want his ultra rare, well, you know, and they won't take no for an answer. He manages to escape, but he brings along a girl from Seirin, Miharu, a sweet pink-haired idiot who is somehow the only girl in the known universe who doesn't trigger his rash. Now he has to live with her, as well as the cavalcade of other beautiful women who randomly start stalking him shortly thereafter for reasons mostly related to the alien girl showing up at his house. There were a number of things that led me to seek out Girls Bravo in the anime section of my local Indigo books, but the biggest by far was a review in one of my anime magazines that talked up how naked everyone got in it. Every episode of this show starts with a naked shower scene. Sold! As it turns out, Girls Bravo's low production values means that it's not great for what I initially bought it for, but in spite of that, I did get a lot of enjoyment out of the series. Its bawdy, visual sense of humor and over-the-top slapstick violence got me laughing hard, and as my first harem anime, it had a lot of escapist value to me as a young, lonely nerd. My memories of this show are fond enough that I actually wrote up a whole segment for it to go in my top comedy anime list, but actually looking back on it, the visual gags and slapstick are spread a little too thin between all of the tired, unfunny harem cliches. It does turn a lot of those tropes up to 11 and gets humor value out of that, but not to the point that it fully works as a parody. Still, if you're in the mood for lowbrow trash, it is a good time, and marathoning the DVDs at sleepovers with one of my best friends was an important bonding moment for the both of us. On top of being my first anime DVD, Girls Bravo was the first show I ever watched through with somebody else. It instilled in me a love of not just watching anime, but talking about it and sharing it with others, and I'm sure I don't have to say why that's important to me now. I'm probably drawing in a lot of calls of shit taste simply for mentioning that I like this show, but I don't really care. I still have a ton of fun when I watch it with friends, and I don't regret buying those DVDs for even a second. Also, Kazuhara Fukuyama is straight up one of the greatest anime villains of all time. Fuck you, fight me. And Kyrie is best girl. Now, Girls Bravo was not the only show I bought on DVD and marathoned with friends when I was younger. I also owned Cromarty High School, Beck Mongolian Chop Squad, Jing King of Bandits, Gankutsuo, Azumanga Daioh, Paranoia Agent, Captain Tyler, Mahuromatic, and Maburaho. But while I loved all of those shows, except for Maburaho, fuck Maburaho, none of them were as important to me as Baccano. I don't know if I even have to explain why that is. Baccano is the subject of the very first video on this channel. I have always loved Baccano's opening, but Durarara's just bored me despite being very similar. It was in mulling over the disconnect between those two opinions and the reason for it and getting angry at Reddit for saying that Durarara's opening was good that I came up with the idea for what's in an OP. If I hadn't obsessed over the differences between these OPs, I never would have found my niche in the YouTube anime scene. If I'd started making YouTube videos at all, they would have been the same boring reviews and analytical pieces that everyone else was making, and nobody would have cared. I'd still be down in the 30k sub range, just barely scraping by if I was making videos at all. But beyond owing it my entire livelihood, which is seriously the best job in the entire world, Baccano is important to me because it was the first anime I ever fully appreciated on a level beyond, wow, this is cool. With Baccano, I was thinking not just about the story, but how it was being told and what it meant. Baccano's non-linear structure demands that you afford more attention to it than your average shonen action romp. In order to follow what's going on, you need to juggle 3 different timelines of events simultaneously, and it's easy to miss little details if you get distracted for even a second. Watching it with the dub on helps a little with this, by the way, and fortunately the dub of Baccano is one of the best that Funimation has ever made. Probably better than the original Japanese thanks to period authentic New York mob slang and accents. Because it requires more of a base level mental investment than most other shows, Baccano primed me to pick up on the subtle details in its cinematography and editing. As a kid, it was pretty revolutionary for me to realize that I was picking up on far more about the story than was coming across simply in what was being said. The really great thing about Baccano is that it gives you far more than you put into it. If you're paying attention, you notice tons of subtle details and appreciate what the show has to say about mortality and the human spirit. And if you're not, you still get to enjoy a badass, action-packed crime drama, albeit one that's a little confusing at times. I learned from this show that you can have dumb, silly fun while still saying something meaningful and hitting strong emotional beats. And that's something that's informed my evaluation of basically everything that I've watched or played since. And on the subject of having fun and knowing when to get serious, that's a big theme of the next anime that I want to talk about, Avatar: The Last Airbender. Fuck you, fight me. Oh wait, I already used that gag. Avatar: The Last Airbender is, in my humble, totally factual, and divinely inspired opinion, one of the greatest TV shows to ever come out of North America or anywhere else. It takes the goofy sense of humor that Nickelodeon was known for before they started sucking, and combines it with the visual aesthetic and storytelling sensibilities of anime. This show is really the complete package, at least for me, nailing basically everything that I value in storytelling. It has a broad and diverse cast of interesting and likable characters, all of whom feel like real people, even the one-off minor roles. And those characters populate one of the most unique, fully realized, and believable fantasy worlds that I've ever had the pleasure of visiting. The amount of detail that the production team poured into this setting is just incredible. They thought through the politics, economics, culture, and geography of 4 very different nations and came up with one of the coolest, most original magic systems in anything ever. As a former martial artist, I really want to geek out about how the bending works, but I'll save that for another video if you guys are really interested in that. The character animation is lively and expressive, and the fights are brilliantly animated and choreographed thanks in no small part to the creative leeway that the production team gave to the Korean animation studios who actually made most of the show. It also has humor to spare, but when it needs to, it manages some truly gut-wrenching character moments and plot turns. It has that emotional range thanks to incredible vocal performances from the likes of Dante Bosco, Mark Hamill, Gray Delisle, and Mako, rest in peace, as well as stellar writing from the show's creators, collectively known as Bright. And on that note, I want to take time to specifically acknowledge staff writer Aaron I don't know how to pronounce that last name, who has writing credit on almost all of the show's best episodes, including the finale. I'm sort of breaking format by talking about this show's myriad qualities instead of what it meant to me, but the two are very closely intertwined. See, before I actually sat down and watched Avatar, I was a narrow-minded anime elitist who scoffed at the very idea of anything truly great coming out of anywhere but Japan. I distinctly remember rolling my eyes when I saw the trailer for Avatar in the extras of a Jimmy Neutron game that I was borrowing from a friend. I mean, I watched a lot of cartoons, I enjoyed those cartoons as a kid, but I had convinced myself that it was all lesser than my precious Chinese cartoons, that there was something special about Japanese animation that just couldn't be replicated or matched in the West. What could I say? I was a dumb kid. Avatar basically put a gun to my head and forced me to confront those misconceptions. It was so great at just about everything that I couldn't justify dismissing it. It forced me to reevaluate other great American animation like Batman the Animated Series and Teen Titans. That served as the eventual impetus for one of the best videos I've ever made, but it had a more profound effect on me. It drastically expanded my horizons. Avatar made me realize that I wasn't just a fan of anime, but animation as a whole, and that I was missing out by limiting my media intake to just stuff that came out of Japan. It also did a lot to increase my creative drive. After all, if some nerds from Rhode Island could craft an adventure story to rival Fullmetal Alchemist and Yu Yu Hakusho, why couldn't I? That, and some other things I'll talk about later, made me get serious about pursuing creative work as a career. Once I got out of high school, one of the very first places that creative drive took me was to film school. And no, I didn't go there to learn to YouTube, although if that's not already a for-profit university course, then I have a scam to propose to some investors. Actually, I went there to learn game design. From the age of about 15 onward, my anime consumption dropped precipitously, and not just because I was more interested in other media. The need to torrent everything or otherwise deal with horrible streaming sites meant that it was too much of a pain in the butt for me to keep up with currently airing shows, and most of my weeb friends weren't interested in following Funimation DVD releases. I replaced my anime consumption with gaming slowly, and eventually decided that I wanted to work in video games. I didn't land that particular dream job, but the intense and varied workload at VFS did give me the work ethic and skills I needed to thrive in this YouTube career. So I guess you can take that as an endorsement or whatever of that school. More importantly, my 24/7 immersion in the world of game development gave me a pressing need for a hobby that wasn't video games, and that drove me back to anime. The anime that grabbed my heart and got me to finally start keeping up with seasonal releases was Fate Zero. I can't quite put my finger on what it was about Fate Zero in particular that got me so invested in it. It could be the impeccable compositing, lighting, and VFX work, which UFOtable has since become famous for, that made it feel truly cinematic when everything else, even shows from Bones and KyoAni, were distinctly TV quality. Or maybe it was the writing of Gen Urobuchi, who, putting aside his penchant for over-the-top tragedy and character deaths, is remarkably skilled at creating interesting, likable characters who feel like they have lives beyond the screen, right up until they stop having those lives. Kiritsugu Emiya is a great protagonist, and Fate Zero has some of my favorite villains and supporting characters in all of anime. Iskander is best girl. Perhaps it was the directorial touch of A. Aoki, who also directs one of my favorite currently airing shows, Recreators, and who made his directorial debut on one of the earlier entries on this list, Girls Bravo. Yeah, the guy behind Wandering Son and all of those different anime that end with Zero cut his teeth on one of history's trashiest harem shows. It's amazing what a difference good source material makes, even though I still love Girls Bravo. Or it could have been the soundtrack, composed by Yuki Kajiura, who, as I mentioned in my recent video about what SAO does right, is one of the most talented composers working in anime today. Facetiousness aside though, it's all of those things. Fate Zero is a damn good anime through and through, and the main thing that separated it from any of the other damn good anime that could have sucked me in its stead was timing. When Fate Zero started airing in fall of 2011, I was heading into pre-production for my final project at VFS, a grueling endeavor that tasked students with pulling together a working video game in just 4 months. I was in increasingly desperate need of something, anything, to occupy my attention that wasn't a game, and no, my Yu-Gi-Oh habit didn't count. And Fate was the new thing at the time, plus Crunchyroll made it super easy for me to keep up with it. If I'd started a term or two earlier, it's easy to imagine that I could have become just as obsessed with Madoka Magica or Star Driver or Steins Gate, maybe Penguin Drum, Tiger and Bunny, or Mirai Nikki if I'd been more willing to pirate, and man, a lot of really fucking great anime came out in 2011. But Fate Zero was the one that came at the right time for me, and luckily it lasted me straight through that final project into graduation and a little beyond. That was especially fortunate because after graduation my life took a turn for the not so good. I'll spare you the details of the sob story, suffice it to say I was having problems at home and I was suddenly single, but having something to watch week after week helped me distract myself from the overwhelming stress. Fortunately, as Fate wound down, I found something new to follow: Space Brothers. At 99 episodes, Space Brothers is one of the longest running series that I've ever watched week to week. For nearly 2 years, I was hooked on A1 Pictures' adaptation of Chuya Koyama's smash hit seinen manga, and I would have kept watching a lot longer if not for the show's sudden, and still unresolved, hiatus. I was never the kind of guy who could actively follow long-running shonen series like Naruto or One Piece. I'd always fall off and have to play catch-up with huge binge sessions a couple of times a year, before I gave up entirely, that is. Yet Space Brothers kept me coming back week after week without fail. As a science geek, I adored the stark and realistic look at the near future of space travel, not to mention the well-researched glimpse into the training programs and day-to-day operations at space administrations like NASA NASA and JAXA. But beyond that, what really drew me into the show was the wonderful cast of characters. Not just because of how interesting and well-rounded they are, though they certainly tick those boxes, but because of what they represent. At its heart, this show is a drama, and unlike so many other anime dramas, it focuses on adults in the professional world rather than teenagers in high school. As someone who had just graduated from school and was struggling to secure anything within even the ballpark of my dream job, I found it reassuring to see people older than me, people who'd already found success in other fields, still working to accomplish their dreams. I enjoy other down-to-earth, character-driven work-life dramas like Silver Spoon and Sakura Quest, and if I'd watched it first, I think Shiro Bako might have filled the same needs for me instead, but the combination of Space Brothers' subject matter and where its characters were in their lives allowed it to carve out a special place in my Kokoro and inspire me to create things myself. But putting that aside, Space Brothers helped open my eyes to the possibility that anime about mundane, real-world subject matter could be just as interesting and engaging as anime about dudes punching other dudes with magic. When I was younger, I mostly watched manly anime like Fullmetal Alchemist, Death Note, and Dragon Ball Z. Believe it or not, I was one of those guys who felt like anime and media in general was wasting my time if it went for 5 minutes without an explosion or boob on screen. Beck and Azumanga Daioh were the only real outliers in my viewing habits back then. With movies and games, I'd started to move away from that mindset in the last few years of high school, but Space Brothers finally made it click for me that anime also had way more to offer than just dumb action, and that I might enjoy that even more than the anime I was already watching. Because of this change in my mindset, I've found tons of new favorites like Rakugo, Toradora, and Silver Spoon. But of course, I never lost my love for over-the-top, action-driven series, at least not as long as they're done right. And there was one that really sucked me in during the summer of 2012, Sword Art Online. Up until SAO, I used Code Geass and Death Note as my benchmarks for profound disappointment in anime. With Death Note especially, that seems like a pretty silly thing to say now, although I do still think that Lelouch's low point in Geass is one of the dumbest fucking things ever fucking written, but nothing that I had seen to this point even remotely prepared me for the drop I was about to feel with SAO. This channel has already chronicled extensively the rise and fall of Sword Art Online, what it did right and what it did very wrong, leading up to one of the most viscerally unpleasant endings in anime history. If you want to hear my thoughts in much more detail about that, I have a whole playlist for you to peruse. Over the course of the first season, I went from genuinely evangelizing for the series to my anime-loving friends, to warning them to maybe stay away from it and wait for the ending, to actively bitching about it to anyone who'd listen, a habit that I would later turn into a stunningly lucrative career. And yes, that is part of why this is on this list. Without Sword Art Online, I quite literally would not be where I am today. This series has netted me collectively almost 100,000 subscribers and something in the ballpark of $6,000. My first video hating on SAO is what enabled me to transform Mother's Basement from a hobby to a full-blown career. But looking back to when I first watched it, that's not all the show did for me. The sharp decline in enjoyment that I felt as I watched it gave me pause. It forced me to examine my viewing choices more thoroughly than I ever had previously. I never wanted to be taken in by a garbage series like that ever again, at least not on anything but my own terms. SAO made me think more critically about entertainment, and I don't think that it's a mistake that the high watermarks of both my career as a YouTuber so far and my former career as a game journalist both came from talking about this terrible show and its terrible spin-offs. Much as I hate Sword Art Online, in a weird way, I kind of love it. Its failings are as myriad and intricately woven as the plot of any genuinely great anime. I probably get more enjoyment out of tearing it apart than people do out of actually watching it for fun, and I owe it a debt of gratitude for being such a wellspring of interesting critical discourse. Of course, it would be a lot better if I owed that kind of debt to something, I don't know, actually good, and fortunately SAO would be shortly followed by a series that I love watching as much as I love discussing it. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a tour de force of absurdity and without question my all-time favorite long-running shonen action series. Its willingness to throw out the status quo and experiment with new casts, new worlds, and even new genres allows it to be both enduring and endlessly fresh and pushes it out a little bit ahead of Hunter x Hunter and Yu Yu Hakusho, which are the other title holders. I had a general policy against watching fan subs because Crunchyroll largely had me covered for anything that I might want to watch anyway, but for JoJo, I broke that in a heartbeat. I know a lot of people say that the show doesn't get good until Battle Tendency, but I was hooked right from the beginning by the absurd, melodramatic life of rich boy Jonathan Joestar and his evil adopted brother Dio. JoJo had a hold on me like nothing else. I even went to the trouble of waiting for the Kami subs just so that I could have the best, most computer crashingest anime watching experience possible. And I rewatched a substantial portion of the series once it came to Blu-ray, something that I almost never do. The manga holds the record for the longest series I've ever caught up on and the fastest binge read I've ever finished. As soon as the first season of JoJo wrapped, I couldn't help myself. I had to read the rest of it. Partly because it was so good and partly because I didn't know who most of the characters in my friend's import copy of JoJo All-Star Battle were. That changed quickly. I blasted through all 5 remaining parts of the manga in a couple weeks, duang translations and all, and I was still left aching for more. There is just something about JoJo that sucks you in, and I am so glad that Crunchyroll has made it more widely available. But that's not just for altruistic love of the series. Dissecting the hidden details in the fantastic JoJo openings is what gave me my first big break on YouTube. The videos I made about the series were discovered by Wooly Madden of Two Best Friends Play, who gave me a shout out on Twitter and boosted my views to levels I'd never seen or even imagined up to that point. I mean, yeah, I saw more success eventually with SAO and One Punch Man, but I don't think that any of those videos would have hit as hard as they did if not for the initial boost that JoJo gave me. And of course, I owe Wooly a great deal for that shout out. Between me and Eyepatchwolf, he has a real knack for discovering great anime YouTubers, but I feel just as indebted to Hirohiko Araki for creating JoJo in the first place. Not only did JoJo create an audience for me to reach, it inspired me to improve on my previous videos like just about nothing else could. I wanted to do justice to this incredible, underappreciated aspect of the show I loved so much, and nothing makes me happier than hearing fans say I managed to do just that. But as important as JoJo is to me, I don't think that anything has ever shifted my perspective so dramatically or ingrained itself in my heart so deeply as the final entry on this list. Anohana is the first anime that ever made me cry as an adult. As a kid, fucking Pokemon made me cry because I was a little bitch, but ever since I passed puberty, I've become a lot harder to crack. To this date, it's one of only 9 pieces of media that has actually managed to do that in my adult years. The others being Toy Story 3, Telltale's The Walking Dead, Valkyria Chronicles, Plastic Memories, Erased, Hiroaka, Your Lie in April, and Undertale. And out of all of those, I think I have the fondest memories of Anohana. It may well be my favorite anime of all time, but it really deserves a full video explaining why that is, so I'm just gonna focus on what it meant to me the first time I watched it. Anohana is not your typical tearjerker drama about people dying at inopportune moments accompanied by sad music. The only person who dies in the show's runtime does so before it even begins. Rather, it is a coming-of-age story about learning to accept losses that have already transpired. It hits at an emotional truth that's difficult to handle for even the most stoic of people, and with apologies if I'm repeating myself, at the time in my life when I watched it, that was something that I really needed. Watching Anohana is incredibly cathartic no matter where you're at in your life. It features career best writing from prolific anime scribe Mario Kata and some of Tatsuyuki Nagai's best directing work, which is really saying something for the guy who directed Toradora, Railgun, Waiting in the Summer, and Iron-Blooded Orphans. But if you're struggling to get over something, be it a lost loved one, a painful ex, or a disappointment in your career, Anohana can be a powerful healing experience. You desperately want to see the main cast reforge their friendships and help Menma pass on, but even when one or more of them is holding that back, you don't hold it against them because all of their flaws, no matter how crazy, are understandable. Watching Anohana encouraged me to reconnect with friends I hadn't seen in a while and be more understanding of the ones I was having a hard time with. It gave me a bit of perspective on things that I was going through, and when I was done bawling my eyes out about the events of the ending, I felt felt better about my own life as a whole. But, and I don't want to downplay this, it's also an immensely entertaining show. It hits many strong emotional highs and lows and gets you super invested in the lives of all its characters. Despite leaving me a sobbing wreck in its last episode, the thing Anohana was best at was making me smile. It is a damn fine TV show that keeps you guessing while you're watching it and always manages to land that perfect emotional payoff. That experience led me to seek out more dramas like it and have a greater appreciation for the emotional elements of other things that don't strictly fit into that mold. Before watching Anohana, I was an almost exclusively plot-focused, detail-oriented critic. In other words, a bad one. Anohana helped me expand my focus and develop a more nuanced critical perspective on the composition of art. It also inspired me to make my own art. As I mentioned in my Linkin Park video, it inspired me to make an anime music video using one of my favorite songs from one of my favorite bands, Queen, and that is one of the things that taught me how to use Premiere as well as I can today. But even if I didn't owe it as much as I do, I think Anohana would still be one of my favorite anime of all time. Having seen it half a dozen times over and the movie several times, it still takes me on an emotional roller coaster every time, and the ending still manages to destroy me. But I'll save talking about that further for another day. I've been indulging myself for like half an hour at this point, and I'm sure you have places to be. That said, I hope that this video was entertaining for you guys, or at least explained some things about me for anyone who was curious. Now, this is far from a complete list of every anime that's ever affected me. I don't think it would be even possible to make something like that. And it cuts off a few years ago because while I'm sure that there are other shows that have changed me since then, it's hard to take inventory of how they've done so while those changes are still fresh and taking effect. So at another milestone, I may do something else in this vein if you guys want more. Now, I'd love to hear about you, so let me know in the comments below what anime or games or movies or whatever made you who you are today. And while you're down there, if you could hit that like button and subscribe, that would be very helpful. If you want to help even more, you can donate to my Patreon, which gives me a budget to pay editors every month and also gives you access to cool rewards like scripts, bloopers, and monthly anime nights where we all hang out and watch Chinese cartoons. Also, you can get your name at the end of videos like these wonderful people who you're seeing right now. Don't you want your name on a thing? Give me money today. Seriously though, I want to say thank you to everyone who supports me through donations or clicking my affiliate links. lootcrate.com/basement has some good shit up for grabs this month, or simply by subscribing, commenting, and sharing videos with your friends. It wouldn't be possible for me to do this without you. This project was a huge undertaking for me, not to mention my editor Lachlan, who has been slaving away at it for like 2 weeks now. And speaking of huge undertakings, my good buddy Joey the Anime Man is currently working on a poll of the top 100 anime of all time according to the Western audience. Nothing like this has really ever been undertaken before, and he wants to get as big a sample size for this as possible, so he's asked me and all of the other anime YouTubers he knows to give it a shout out and get our fans on board. So I want you guys to go to the poll, which I'll link to in the doobly-doo, and tell him how much Recreators is the best anime of all time and Erased is the second best anime of all time. Actually, I'm probably putting like Anohana and Beck in there and maybe a few other things from this list, but I really want to see how this turns out because they do this in Japan all the time, but the West has never really had an equivalent to this on this scale, and I'm just curious to see what the results will be, because it's totally going to help me decide what videos to make next. If you're not sick of hearing my voice yet, then you should check out my 100,000 subscribers special right up here, or you can click down here for some recommendations of more obscure anime. If you want to check out my podcast, The Weekly Weebcast, you can do so somewhere in this vicinity, or if this is the last I see of you today, then I'm Geoff Thew, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.